The static crackled through Lieutenant Commander Marcus Bulldog Rodriguez's headset like electricity before a storm. 3 days into what should have been a routine extraction mission in the mountains of northern Afghanistan, his six-man SEAL team was pinned down in a valley that had become their potential grave. The Taliban had closed every exit route, mortar rounds walking closer to their position, with each thunderous impact that shook dust from the rocky outcropping above them. Rodriguez pressed his back against the cold stone, feeling the weight of command crushing down harder than the enemy fire. "Overlord, this is Bravo 6, Rodriguez whispered into his throat mic, his voice barely audible over the distant crack of AK-47s. "We are combat ineffective. Request immediate air support, over." The response came back distorted, fragmented by the mountains that seemed to swallow radio waves like hungry mouths. "Negative on air assets. Storm front moving in. Hold position." The transmission dissolved into white noise, leaving Rodriguez staring at a sky that had turned the color of old pewter. That's when Petty Officer Jake Mongoose Chen, their youngest team member, noticed something impossible on his heads-up display. "Sir," Chen's voice carried a tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'm showing a friendly aircraft inbound, but—" He paused, his finger hovering over the glowing screen. "The call sign doesn't exist in our database. Shows as Wraith 17. Rodriguez felt ice form in his stomach. Ghost call signs were the stuff of legend in special operations, aircraft that appeared on friendly systems but had no official record, no logged flight plans, no paper trail. Stories whispered in mess halls spoke of pilots who had died in action but whose transponder codes somehow lived on, manifesting when American forces faced certain death. Urban legends, folklore, the kind of bullshit that kept Marines awake at night. But the blip on Chen's screen was moving with purpose, descending through weather that should have grounded every aircraft in the theater. The enemy fire had stopped, as if the Taliban fighters sensed something predatory circling overhead. In the sudden silence, Rodriguez could hear his own heartbeat and the labored breathing of his wounded radio man, Petty Officer Williams, whose blood was slowly staining the mountain stone beneath them. "Bravo 6, this is Wraith 17. The voice that cut through the static was female, calm as a lake at dawn, with an edge that suggested she had stared death in the face and found it wanting. "I understand you gentlemen are having a difficult evening." The sky above them remained empty, but somewhere in that gray void, salvation was coming. Rodriguez had heard stories about female pilots throughout his 15-year career, whispered with the kind of grudging respect that military men reserved for those who had proven themselves in blood. But this voice carried something different, an authority that seemed to emanate from the radio itself, as if the mountains had found their voice and decided to speak. "Wraith 17, Bravo 6, Rodriguez responded, his training overriding his confusion. "We have 6 souls on station, 1 wounded, surrounded by approximately 40 enemy fighters in a valley grid." He rattled off their coordinates with mechanical precision while his mind raced. "Copy that, Bravo 6. I have your position." There was a pause, filled only by the distant sound of rotor blades that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I'm going to need you to mark your position with IR strobes and get everyone's heads down. This is going to get loud." Petty Officer Chen was frantically scrolling through his tactical database, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his tablet. "Sir, there's no record of any Wraith call signs in active service. No flight plans filed for this grid square. No air assets assigned to our operation." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. The kid was barely 22, fresh from Bud S, and this was his first real firefight. Rodriguez pulled out his infrared strobe and activated it, the invisible beacon pulsing in wavelengths that only night vision could detect. "Mongoose, stop digging. I don't care if she's the ghost of Amelia Earhart, she's here and we need her." He pressed his transmit button again. "Wraith 17, Bravo 6. IR strobes are active. We are marked." The sound that filled the valley next was unlike anything Rodriguez had experienced in his decade and a half of combat operations. It wasn't the familiar wop-wop of a Black Hawk or the aggressive snarl of an Apache. This was something else, a whisper of rotor blades cutting through air with surgical precision, moving with the kind of stealth that spoke of advanced acoustic dampening, and a pilot who understood how to use terrain like a weapon. Bravo 6, I have visual on your strobes. You're going to see some fireworks in approximately 30 seconds. Keep your heads down and your eyes closed unless you want to see spots for the next week. The first Hellfire missile impacted the Taliban position with the sound of thunder being born. The flash painted the inside of Rodriguez's closed eyelids white, and the concussion wave pressed against his chest like an invisible fist. The barrage lasted exactly 90 seconds, each missile strike placed with surgical precision that spoke of a pilot who had studied the terrain and enemy positions with the focus of a surgeon examining an X-ray. Rodriguez counted 12 separate impacts, each one eliminating a firing position that had kept his team pinned down. When the thunder finally stopped, the silence that followed was so complete it seemed to ring in his ears. Bravo 6, this is Wraith 17. You are clear to move. Exfil LZ is 8 clicks northwest at grid. The coordinates came through crisp and clear, but when Rodriguez tried to respond, his radio crackled with empty static. The mysterious pilot had vanished as suddenly as she had appeared, leaving only the acrid smell of high explosives and the distant wail of secondary explosions from an ammunition cache she had found and destroyed. Sergeant First Class Michael Hammer Barnes, the team's medic, was already working on Williams, applying pressure bandages with movements made automatic by countless hours of training. He's stable, sir. Lost some blood, but the shrapnel missed anything vital. Barnes looked up at Rodriguez with eyes that had seen too much combat in too many countries. Who the hell was that pilot? I've never seen missile placement that precise. Rodriguez helped Chen gather their gear while scanning the ridgelines for any remaining enemy movement. The Taliban positions were nothing but smoking craters now, scattered debris that had once been fighting positions and the men who had occupied them. I don't know, Hammer, but she just saved our asses. He activated his GPS and confirmed the extraction coordinates. 8 clicks to freedom, gentlemen. Let's move before they figure out what hit them. The team moved through the night with the fluid efficiency of men who had trained together until they could communicate through shadows and hand signals. Williams walked under his own power, though Barnes stayed close enough to catch him if he stumbled. The moon was a thin crescent, providing just enough light to navigate by while keeping them hidden from any surviving enemy forces. As they crested the first ridge, Rodriguez caught himself scanning the empty sky above them. Somewhere up there, a pilot with a ghost call sign was flying an aircraft that officially didn't exist, saving American lives with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. The thought should have unsettled him, but instead he felt a strange sense of comfort, as if guardian angels came equipped with Hellfire missiles and voices that could cut through static like a blade. The extraction landing zone sat in a bowl-shaped depression between two peaks, marked by coordinates that had been etched into Rodriguez's memory the moment the mysterious pilot transmitted them. As his team approached the designated spot, Rodriguez found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about air operations in this sector. No pilot should have been able to navigate in these conditions, with weather that kept even their most experienced aviators grounded. Yet Wraith 17 had not only found them, but had eliminated a superior enemy force, with the kind of precision that took years to develop. Bravo 6, this is Overlord. The voice of their commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Hayes, cut through the radio static with unexpected clarity. We show you moving toward exfil coordinates. Can you confirm status of unknown air asset? The question hung in the air like morning mist, and Rodriguez realized that even command had no idea who their mysterious savior had been. Overlord Bravo 6. Unknown air asset eliminated enemy positions and departed grid square. No visual contact made. Aircraft designation was Wraith 17. Rodriguez chose his words carefully, knowing that every syllable would be analyzed and recorded. In the military, mysteries had a way of becoming investigations, and investigations had a way of becoming problems for everyone involved. The silence from Overlord stretched long enough that Rodriguez wondered if they had lost communication again. When Hayes finally responded, her voice carried the weight of someone who had just consulted multiple databases and found nothing but empty spaces where answers should have been. Copy that, Bravo 6. We have no record of Wraith 17 in theater. Maintain security at Exfil Point. Dust off inbound in 20 minutes. Chen was setting up a perimeter watch when he looked up at Rodriguez with the expression of someone who had just realized the ground beneath his feet might not be as solid as he thought. Sir, what if the stories are true? What if there really are pilots out there who? He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that would make him sound like a boot camp recruit sharing ghost stories. Rodriguez considered the question while watching Williams accept another dose of morphine from Barnes. Mongoose, in 15 years of doing this job, I've learned that sometimes the impossible shows up right when you need it most. Whether that's training, luck, or something else entirely doesn't matter when your life depends on it. The sound of approaching rotors echoed off the valley walls, growing louder with each passing second. But these were familiar sounds, the heavy thrum of a Black Hawk helicopter coming to take them home. The debriefing room at Bagram Airfield smelled of burnt coffee and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were recovering from a mild illness. Rodriguez sat across from Colonel Hayes, a woman whose reputation for thorough investigation was legendary throughout Special Operations Command. Between them lay a stack of files, radio transcripts, and satellite imagery that painted a picture of an engagement that should have been impossible. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Marcus. Hayes leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in a gesture that Rodriguez had learned to associate with incoming complications. An unidentified aircraft, using a call sign that doesn't exist in any NATO database, appeared in weather conditions that grounded our entire air wing, eliminated a superior enemy force with precision that would make our best pilots jealous, and then vanished without a trace. Rodriguez nodded, knowing how ridiculous it sounded when laid out in the stark language of military reports. That's correct, ma'am, but my team is alive because of Wraith 17. That's the only fact that matters to me. Hayes pulled out a photograph from the stack and slid it across the table. The image showed aerial reconnaissance of the valley where Rodriguez's team had been trapped, taken 12 hours after the engagement. The Taliban positions were perfectly circular craters, each one placed with mathematical precision to eliminate threats while avoiding collateral damage to nearby structures. Our analysis shows that this level of accuracy would require intimate knowledge of the terrain, enemy positions, and advanced targeting systems. Whoever Wraith 17 is, she's not some weekend warrior. The colonel's use of the feminine pronoun wasn't lost on Rodriguez. Hayes had clearly done her homework, analyzing voice recordings and cross-referencing them with known pilots. Ma'am, have you identified the pilot? Hayes was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on a different photograph that she hadn't yet shared. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of classified information that existed in the gray zones between official records and military legend. There are stories, Marcus, stories about pilots who push the boundaries of what's possible. Some of them are cautionary tales. Others, she paused, as if weighing her words against regulations that governed what could and couldn't be discussed. Others become something else entirely. The photograph she finally revealed showed a pilot standing beside an aircraft that Rodriguez didn't recognize, despite his encyclopedic knowledge of military aviation. The woman in the image had the bearing of someone who had earned her place through competence rather than politics, her flight suit worn with the casual confidence of someone who lived in the cockpit. The photograph seemed to capture more than just an image. It held a story that Hayes was clearly reluctant to tell. The pilot's stance suggested someone comfortable with machines that demanded perfection, and her eyes held the distant focus of someone who had learned to see threats long before they became problems. Rodriguez studied the aircraft behind her, noting design elements that seemed familiar yet somehow wrong, as if someone had taken conventional military aviation and pushed it into territory that existed outside normal operational parameters. "Her name is Captain Rebecca Wraith Kovac," Hayes said finally, her voice carrying the tone of someone sharing information that officially didn't exist. "Daughter of a Serbian immigrant who fled the Yugoslav wars. Lost her father in the towers on September 11th. He was a janitor working the morning shift in the North Tower. She joined the Air Force 3 days after her 18th birthday with scores that broke recruitment records." Rodriguez felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in ways that created more questions than answers. "Ma'am, what happened to her?" Hayes turned the photograph face down, as if the image itself carried weight that was difficult to bear. "Captain Kovac was one of our most gifted pilots. Test pilot credentials, instructor qualifications, combat decorations that read like a Hollywood script. She was selected for a program that—" Hayes paused, choosing her words with the precision of someone walking through a minefield. "Let's say she was chosen for experimental operations that pushed the boundaries of what we thought possible." The room felt smaller somehow, as if the classified weight of the conversation was consuming oxygen. Rodriguez had been in enough briefings to recognize when he was approaching information that existed in the space between official records and operational necessity. What kind of experimental operations? The kind that require pilots who can operate beyond normal human limitations. Advanced aircraft, extended mission parameters, combat scenarios that demand split-second decisions under conditions that would break most people. Hayes leaned forward, her eyes meeting Rodriguez's with an intensity that suggested this conversation was far from academic. 3 years ago, Captain Kovac and her aircraft disappeared during a classified mission over the Hindu Kush. No wreckage was ever recovered. No distress signals were recorded. She simply vanished. The implication hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire. Rodriguez felt his understanding of the previous night's events shifting, realigning around possibilities that challenged everything he thought he knew about military operations. "Ma'am, are you suggesting that Wraith 17 was Captain Kovac?" Hayes stood and walked to the window, looking out at the flight line where conventional aircraft sat in neat rows under the harsh Afghan sun. "I'm not suggesting anything, Marcus. I'm telling you that sometimes the military produces individuals who transcend normal operational parameters. What they become after that." She turned back to face him. "That's above both our pay grades." The mess hall at Bagram buzzed with the usual mixture of exhaustion and gallows humor that characterized mealtimes in a combat zone. Rodriguez sat with his team, picking at reconstituted eggs, while his mind wrestled with the implications of his conversation with Colonel Hayes. Around them, the familiar sounds of military life continued, the clatter of metal trays, conversations in a dozen different languages, the occasional burst of laughter that seemed too loud for the circumstances. Williams had been patched up and was already complaining about being stuck on light duty, his arm in a sling that he wore like a badge of honor. "I'm telling you guys that pilots saved our asses with missiles that landed like surgical strikes. I've never seen anything like it." He gestured with his good arm, nearly knocking over Chen's coffee. "Perfect placement, perfect timing. Whoever she was, she knew exactly what she was doing." Barnes, methodically consuming his breakfast with the efficiency of someone who had learned to eat whenever food was available, looked up from his tray. "The Taliban fighters we recovered intel from, the ones who survived, they were talking about Afrit before they died. Desert spirits. They thought something supernatural had attacked them." Chen pushed food around his tray without eating, his tablet displaying tactical analyses he had been working on throughout the night. "I've run the numbers a dozen times. The missile strikes followed a pattern that suggests the pilot had real-time intelligence on enemy positions that we didn't have. She knew where they were before they moved." Rodriguez found himself thinking about Captain Rebecca Kovac, about a young woman who had lost her father in the towers and had spent her life mastering machines that could deliver justice at hypersonic speeds. The official records painted a picture of exceptional competence, but Hayes's carefully chosen words suggested something that transcended normal military service. "Maybe some people are just born to fly," he said quietly. "With respect, sir," Chen said, looking up from his calculations, "the aircraft performance parameters I recorded don't match anything in our inventory. The acoustic signature was wrong. The missile payload capacity exceeded known platforms, and the flight characteristics—" He paused, as if saying the words out loud would make them more real. "Sir, I don't think she was flying anything that officially exists." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Master Sergeant Patricia Iron Washington, the base's senior enlisted advisor, whose presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the vicinity. Washington had served 3 tours in Iraq and 4 in Afghanistan, earning decorations that required a second ribbon rack to display properly. Washington approached their table with the purposeful stride of someone who had information that needed to be shared immediately. Her expression carried the kind of seriousness that made experienced operators pay attention, and Rodriguez felt his team straighten unconsciously as she drew near. "Rodriguez, I need to speak with you and your team, privately." They followed her outside to a maintenance hangar that had been converted into an informal briefing space, away from the listening ears that populated every public area of a military base. Washington closed the door behind them and activated a white noise generator that would defeat most electronic surveillance. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Understood?" The team acknowledged in unison, their voices carrying the weight of men who understood that some information came with the kind of responsibility that could define careers. Washington pulled out a manila folder that looked like it had been handled by many hands over many years. "Wraith 17 isn't a ghost story. She's a legend." Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken as Washington opened the folder, revealing photographs and documents that carried the faded quality of materials that had been classified for years. Captain Rebecca Kovac was part of a program called Project Skyward: experimental aircraft, experimental tactics, experimental pilots who could operate beyond normal human limitations. The first photograph showed Kovac standing beside an aircraft that defied easy categorization. It appeared to be a hybrid between a helicopter and a fixed-wing aircraft, with rotor systems that could tilt and retract, weapons pods that seemed to flow seamlessly into the fuselage, and a cockpit designed around a single pilot who would need to process information at superhuman speeds. The program produced 3 prototype aircraft and selected 6 pilots over a 2-year period. Of those 6, only Captain Kovac successfully completed the training regimen. Washington's voice carried the respect of someone who understood the difference between exceptional and extraordinary. She became something that had never existed before, a pilot who could operate at the intersection of human intuition and machine precision. Chen was studying the photographs with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail. "Ma'am, what happened to the program?" Washington's expression darkened slightly, as if the question had touched on memories that remained painful even years later. "Budget cuts, political concerns about creating weapon systems that depended on individual operators rather than standardized equipment, the kind of bureaucratic thinking that values predictability over capability." She paused, looking at each team member in turn. Captain Kovac was flying the final test mission when her aircraft disappeared. The implication was clear, though unspoken. Somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, a pilot who had transcended normal operational parameters was still flying, still fighting, still saving American lives with precision that bordered on the supernatural. Barnes, who had remained silent throughout Washington's briefing, finally spoke with the measured tone of someone who had spent years treating wounded warriors. "Ma'am, with all due respect, how do we know Captain Kovac survived whatever happened 3 years ago? How do we know Wraith 17 is the same person? Washington pulled out another photograph, this one clearly taken from gun camera footage during a recent engagement. The image showed an aircraft silhouetted against storm clouds, its unusual profile unmistakable despite the poor visibility conditions. Because she's been saving American lives for the past 18 months, always appearing when conventional air support is unavailable, always using the call sign Wraith 17, always disappearing before anyone can get close enough for visual identification. Rodriguez studied the gun camera image, noting details that confirmed Chen's earlier analysis. The aircraft's design incorporated stealth characteristics that went beyond anything in the current inventory, and its weapons systems appeared to be integrated in ways that suggested years of refinement and modification. How many rescues? 14 confirmed engagements, 47 American lives saved, 0 friendly fire incidents, 0 collateral damage. Washington's statistics painted a picture of operational perfection that defied probability. She appears when weather grounds other aircraft, eliminates threats with precision that our best pilots struggle to match, and vanishes before anyone can establish contact. Williams shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his wounded arm reminding him of how close they had come to becoming statistics themselves. "Ma'am, why isn't this public knowledge? Why aren't there medals and recognition for someone who's saved that many lives?" The question touched on the complex relationship between exceptional performance and military bureaucracy, where actions that transcended normal parameters often existed in gray areas that defied standard classification. Washington's expression suggested she had wrestled with the same question. Because Captain Kovach operates outside normal command structures, because her aircraft exists outside normal acquisition channels, because acknowledging her officially would require explaining things that certain people prefer to keep classified. Rodriguez felt pieces of the puzzle settling into place, forming a picture that was both beautiful and troubling. Somewhere in the Afghan mountains, a pilot who had lost everything was continuing to serve in ways that transcended normal understanding of duty and sacrifice. "What do you need from us?" Washington closed the folder and met his eyes with the directness of someone who was about to ask for something that might define the rest of their careers. "Nothing official, but if you encounter Wraith 17 again, if she needs assistance or extraction, if she makes contact." Washington paused. "You help her, whatever she needs, no questions asked." The team exchanged glances that communicated volumes without words. They were being asked to participate in something that existed outside normal channels, to honor a pilot who had transcended regulations in service of something larger than bureaucracy. 3 weeks later, Rodriguez found himself leading another mission into the same mountain range where they had encountered Wraith 17. This time, their objective was a high-value target whose capture could provide intelligence on Taliban operations throughout the region. The mission parameters were straightforward: infiltrate, capture, extract. Standard special operations procedure executed by professionals who had perfected their craft through repetition and blood. But as their helicopter approached the insertion point, Rodriguez felt a familiar tension in his stomach that had nothing to do with pre-mission nerves. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, with storm fronts moving in from multiple directions that would make extraction challenging under the best circumstances. Their pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Jennifer "Cyclone" Martinez, was fighting wind shear that made the aircraft buck and yaw like an untrained horse. "Bravo 6, this is getting ugly up here." Martinez's voice cut through the intercom with the strained focus of someone managing multiple variables simultaneously. "I can get you to the LZ, but pickup might be problematic if this weather continues to deteriorate." Rodriguez pressed his transmit button, his voice steady despite the turbulence that was making his team look green around the edges. "Copy that, Cyclone. We'll adapt and overcome." The phrase was standard military bravado, but as he watched lightning illuminate the peaks around them, Rodriguez wondered if adaptation would be enough. The insertion went smoothly despite the weather, with Martinez demonstrating the kind of flying skills that earned her the respect of men who trusted their lives to helicopter pilots on a regular basis. Rodriguez's team fast-roped into a landscape that seemed designed by hostile gods, jagged rocks, narrow valleys, and wind that carried the promise of worse weather to come. Their target compound sat in a valley that provided natural defense against ground assault, but would be vulnerable to air attack if they could coordinate properly. Rodriguez studied the terrain through night vision that turned the world into green-tinted geometry, noting firing positions and escape routes with the methodical attention of someone who had learned that details saved lives. Overlord Bravo 6, we are on station and beginning approach to target. Rodriguez's transmission was immediately answered by static that suggested the storm was interfering with communications in ways that could complicate the entire operation. That's when Chen, monitoring their tactical communications array, noticed something that made him freeze in place. "Sir," his voice carried the same tremor they had heard 3 weeks earlier. "I'm showing inbound air traffic. Call sign Wraith 17. Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken. Somewhere above the storm clouds, their guardian angel was flying again. The compound below them erupted into activity as Rodriguez's team moved into position. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies, and the crack of AK-47s echoed off the valley walls with increasing intensity. The high-value target had more security than intelligence reports had suggested, and what should have been a quick snatch-and-grab operation was rapidly evolving into a sustained firefight. "Bravo 6, this is Wraith 17. The voice cut through radio static with the same calm authority Rodriguez remembered from their previous encounter. "I have eyes on your situation. Looks like you walked into a family reunion." Rodriguez pressed himself against cover while rounds snapped overhead like angry insects. "Wraith 17, Bravo 6. We have approximately 20 enemy fighters between us and our objective. Request immediate air support." "Copy that, Bravo 6. I see your problem." There was a pause filled with the sound of rotor blades that seemed to come from the storm itself. "I'm going to clear a path for you, but I need your team to execute a coordinated assault when I give the word. Can you do that?" Rodriguez looked at his team, reading their faces in the green glow of night vision. Williams was back to full strength, his wounded arm functioning normally. Barnes had his medical kit positioned for quick access, anticipating casualties. Chen was monitoring multiple communication channels while maintaining watch on their flanks. These were professionals who had trained together until they could function as a single organism. "Affirmative, Wraith 17. We are ready to move on your command." The first missile strike illuminated the valley like daylight, eliminating a machine gun position that had been preventing their advance. The explosion was followed immediately by a second impact that took out a mortar team, and then a third that silenced the sniper who had been targeting them from an elevated position. Each strike was placed with surgical precision that left their target building untouched while systematically eliminating the defenses around it. "Bravo 6, you are clear to advance. Your target is in the main building, second floor, northeast corner room. 2 guards outside the door, both armed with automatic weapons." Rodriguez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Wraith 17 wasn't just providing air support. She was conducting reconnaissance that should have been impossible from an aircraft flying in storm conditions. "How do you have visual on interior positions?" "Trade secrets, Bravo 6. Move now before they reposition their defenses." The team advanced through the compound with the fluid efficiency of men who trusted their air support completely. Rodriguez found himself moving with confidence that bordered on the supernatural, knowing that Wraith 17 was watching over them with capabilities that transcended normal understanding. The target building was exactly as Wraith 17 had described. Two guards stood outside a wooden door that looked like it hadn't been painted since the Soviet occupation. Rodriguez and Barnes moved with synchronized precision, taking down both sentries with suppressed weapons before they could raise an alarm. The interior of the building smelled of burning kerosene and unwashed bodies, with the kind of darkness that seemed to absorb their night vision equipment. "Second floor, northeast corner," Rodriguez whispered into his throat mic, more for his team's benefit than because Wraith 17 needed confirmation. They found their target exactly where she had said he would be, a Taliban commander whose intelligence value was measured in American lives that could be saved through information he possessed. The capture went smoothly, with practiced efficiency that spoke to countless hours of training in close-quarters combat. Within minutes, they had their prisoner secured and were ready for extraction. Rodriguez activated his GPS beacon and confirmed their position with Overlord, but the response that came back carried unwelcome news. Bravo 6 Overlord, storm conditions have exceeded safe flight parameters. Dust-off is delayed until weather clears. Estimate 4 hours minimum. 4 hours in hostile territory with a high-value prisoner was a lifetime when enemy reinforcements could arrive at any moment. Rodriguez felt the familiar weight of command decisions that balanced risk against necessity, knowing that every choice could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Bravo 6, this is Wraith 17. The voice cut through his tactical calculations with an offer that shouldn't have been possible. I can provide extraction for your team and prisoner. Single lift, immediate departure. Rodriguez felt his team's eyes on him as he considered options that existed outside normal operational parameters. Accepting extraction from an unofficial aircraft flown by a pilot who technically didn't exist would create paperwork that could define the rest of his career. But keeping his team alive in hostile territory was a responsibility that transcended bureaucratic concerns. Wraith 17, what are your passenger limitations? 7 souls plus equipment. I'll be on station in 90 seconds. The sound that filled the valley next was unlike anything Rodriguez had heard from conventional aircraft. It was whisper-quiet despite obvious power, suggesting propulsion systems that had been designed to operate in stealth mode. When Wraith 17 finally appeared through the storm clouds, her aircraft seemed to materialize from the darkness itself. The machine that descended toward them defied easy description. It incorporated design elements from multiple aircraft types, with rotors that transitioned seamlessly between helicopter and fixed-wing configurations. The cockpit was enclosed in what appeared to be advanced transparent armor, revealing the silhouette of a single pilot whose movements suggested perfect integration with her machine. The aircraft touched down with the gentle precision of someone who had learned to land in conditions that would challenge most pilots. Rodriguez could see Kovacs through the transparent armor of her cockpit, her face illuminated by instrument displays that painted her features in blue and green light. She looked exactly like the photograph Hayes had shown him, but with an additional quality that suggested someone who had found perfect synchronization between human capability and mechanical precision. Load your prisoner and equipment. We have a narrow window before enemy reinforcements arrive. Kovacs' voice carried the calm efficiency of someone who had calculated every variable and found them manageable. The passenger compartment of her aircraft was configured with restraint systems that could secure prisoners safely during high-performance maneuvers. Rodriguez's team moved with practiced efficiency, securing their prisoner and equipment while marveling at the interior of an aircraft that seemed to incorporate technology they didn't recognize. The seats were designed for combat operations, with integrated communication systems and displays that provided real-time tactical information. Chen was openly starring at instrumentation that appeared to be decades ahead of anything he had seen. As the last team member strapped in, Kovacs' voice came through the internal communication system with a warmth that contrasted with her professional demeanor during combat operations. "Gentlemen, welcome aboard. Keep your hands and feet inside the aircraft at all times, and try not to lose your lunch during the exciting parts. The takeoff defied physics as Rodriguez understood it. Instead of the gradual ascent typical of helicopters, Kovach's aircraft rose vertically with smooth acceleration that pressed them into their seats without the jarring vibration of conventional rotorcraft. When they reached sufficient altitude, the rotors transitioned to horizontal flight configuration with mechanical precision that spoke of systems designed by engineers who understood both aerodynamics and combat requirements. Wraith 17, this is beautiful flying, Rodriguez said, genuinely impressed by the smooth transition between flight modes. Where did you learn to operate this aircraft? Kovach's laugh carried both joy and sadness, as if the question had touched on memories that were simultaneously precious and painful. Same place I learned everything else that matters, from necessity and loss. She paused as the aircraft banked smoothly around a mountain peak that appeared and disappeared in storm clouds. My father always said that angels watch over those who serve others. Turns out he was more right than he knew. Rodriguez felt something settle into place in his understanding of the woman who was flying them to safety. Captain Rebecca Kovach hadn't died in the Hindu Kush 3 years ago. She had been transformed into something that transcended normal military service, becoming a guardian angel with hellfire missiles and a voice that could cut through static and storm. The flight to Bagram passed in comfortable silence, broken only by the whisper of advanced engines and the occasional burst of radio traffic, as Kovach coordinated with air traffic control, using authentication codes that somehow verified her authority despite her official non-existence. Rodriguez found himself studying the pilot through the transparent partition that separated the passenger compartment from the cockpit, noting the fluid way she interfaced with controls that seemed to respond to her thoughts as much as her physical inputs. Chen was documenting everything on his tablet, recording specifications and performance parameters that would fuel military aviation discussions for years to come. Sir, the fuel efficiency alone represents a breakthrough in propulsion technology. We've been airborne for 40 minutes at high speed, and her fuel consumption indicators show minimal usage. Williams, whose experience as a radioman made him sensitive to communication capabilities, was equally impressed by different aspects of their rescue aircraft. The radio systems are incredible. She's maintaining clear communication with multiple frequencies simultaneously, and I can hear background processing that suggests she's monitoring Taliban communications in real time. Barnes was examining the medical equipment integrated into the passenger compartment, noting capabilities that exceeded most field hospitals. This aircraft is configured for extended operations with wounded personnel. Everything you'd need for trauma surgery, long-term care, even surgical procedures during flight. Rodriguez realized they weren't just being rescued by an exceptional pilot. They were experiencing a platform that represented the future of military aviation, designed around a single individual who had somehow become more than the sum of her training and experience. Wraith 17, how long have you been operating independently? Kovach's response came after a pause that suggested she was considering how much truth she was willing to share. Time moves differently when you're between worlds.